Before today's podcast, we would like to thank musical engineering students Dylan Lodge and Ron Marchlensky for composing our brand new theme for What Didn't Happen. Here it is in its entirety. Welcome to the second episode of What Didn't Happen. I'm Drew Roberts.
And I'm Kyle Hope.
Now we'll be discussing a real moment in history and then discuss an alternate path where the Cold War turned to the worst.
But today, we'll start by discussing the real history of what happened with the 1983 potential nuclear disaster. The two superpowers at the time, the US and the Soviet Union, were having slight disagreements between the two for over 38 years, all culminating into an incident that threatened total nuclear destruction onto the world. As Einstein has once said, "I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." The Cold War wasn't your typical war in the same sense as people fighting each other. It was more of mental warfare between the US and the Soviet Union. It was more of a philosophical battle. And there was a moment in the Cold War where the two sides were truly destined to destroy each other outright. And this incident was called the Stanislav Petrov incident, where Stanislav Petrov was just your average, run-of-the-mill Russian soldier at the time. And he was in charge of monitoring a radar for the Soviet Union in a panel tower, where he would keep eye on the radar in case any nuclear missiles were to reach Russia in any sort of way. Because at the time, both sides were very skeptical of each other. They're very wary of each other, and they wanted to always be ready for a nuclear war, because they knew there was a pretty good chance that that could happen. And in the radar at the panel tower where Stanislav Petrov was at, there was a blip. And usually whenever a blip happens, you report to your higher authority and be like, "There's a nuclear strike happening. We gotta respond now." Because if they don't respond now, they will be decimated and they won't have any fighting chance. But instead, Stanislav Petrov at the time, he noticed that this wasn't your typical blip where it looked like a nuclear strike was happening. It didn't look like an actual missile attack. So he decided not to tell his higher up authorities, risking his life, because if he was wrong, he would surely get executed for this. But he was right. It was actually, the thing in the radar was just the sun's glare. And because of his decision, he potentially saved billions of lives. And at the time, once the incident came public, it was realized that his decision likely saved the world from complete collapse. And the Cold War would continue, but not be nearly as bad until 1991, where the Soviet Union would dissolve.
As you know, we're experts in interdimensional travel.
Of course.
We'll discuss what didn't happen in the Stanislav Petrov incident. So, in this alternate scenario of this universe that didn't play out right. So, in this alternate scenario, the Stanislav Petrov incident played out completely differently. In this alternate scenario, Petrov got an alert on his radar about an incoming nuclear attack from the U.S., but instead of calling it a false alarm, he alerted his superiors and of the higher-ups at the USSR. And this one act alone changed the timeline completely. This one act by the U.S., this one act by Petrov started what we like to think of as World War III.
So, what is World War III?
In this alternate timeline, instead of the Cold War playing out as a stalemate, the Cold War would turn into something far worse. The two superpowers would clash, with the USSR firing first, with nuclear warheads firing at every single one of the US's nuclear bases across the world, causing nuclear fallout to spread across the globe.
But what is nuclear fallout?
Well, the nuclear fallout that would occur would cause mass destruction across the globe. Major landmarks would be destroyed, causing many catastrophes. But once this dust settled, it would cause some sort of nuclear winter and have a catastrophic effect on civilization.
So, when you say the nuclear winter would happen, what exactly is the nuclear winter?
Well, a nuclear winter is when smoke from all these fires that the nuclear warheads would cause brings soot and smoke up into the atmosphere that would heat intensely by the sun and move into the upper stratosphere. And this effect would spread globally, almost like nuclear warming today, and last for years and years, causing the atmosphere to become almost toxic. So, in this scenario, it would almost become like a fallout, nuclear.
Isn't that kind of like the Fallout 77 game?
Well, yes, it would. And I guess that's what kind of happened in this timeline.
I mean, that game was pretty wacky, but...
Of course, yes, it was.
Now,
Kyle.
would people still be alive?
Well, there would be those few oddballs who prepped over 40 years in advance.
No.
But these would be the real survivors.
It's pretty wacky.
It is. Where, in most countries, they have a sort of bunker for their head of state and head of power to go in times of these crises.
Oh, so they can just escape, you know?
Yes, Kyle, they could.
Ah.
But if they wouldn't have all the power they would. They'd just still be alive. So really, the real survivors is like your old grandpa. He thought that the world was going to end in 2000. So he prepared a bunker. He prepared food rations for the next 20-odd years.
He's the man. He's the man who prepared.
He is. That he is. So eventually, people in this apocalyptic scenario would eventually ride out this storm. Well, I think that's all we have time for today, Kyle. Maybe some final words.
Well, that's all, folks. Hit that like button, subscribe, make sure you hit that bell so you don't miss any future releases from Red Devil Productions.